How to Read Literature Like a Professor by Thomas E. Foster, and I read chapter 24, Don't Read with Your Eyes. The purpose of chapter 24 was to read through the narrator's eyes and not your own. So one may find it difficult to fully grasp the purpose of a literary work when reading from one's personal point of view. Foster suggests that in order to understand the purpose of a literary work and read literature like a professor, one must read through the narrator's perspective and not their own. So, perspective is a particular attitude toward or way of regarding something, a point of view. And perspective is how a person sees things, which affects how a story is told. So what we have to remember is the information in the story is told through the character's perspective. And the character's perspective may be different to how we see certain things. So we have to try to disregard our own perspective and what we know when reading literature to understand a literary work. I believe we also watched a video on AP Classroom about perspective, which stated that narrators have complete control about what they include in the story, and they tell us what they see. And the video on AP Classroom explained perspective using a picture frame. So essentially, we must see everything in the picture frame to understand the narrator's perspective. A short story that the author referenced in chapter 24 was Sony Blues. And in chapter 24, Foster uses Sony Blues, a story taking place in the 1950s about a math teacher whose brother, a recovering drug addict, serves time in prison. The two brothers had a weak relationship since they were both two different people with different values. One night, the math teacher decides to watch his brother Sony perform his music for the very first time. The math teacher was moved as he heard the joy and suffering behind the music and offered Sony some scotch and milk. In the closing of the story, the cup of alcohol is referenced as the very cup of trembling, which is a biblical reference. So one might think you should never give alcohol to a recovering drug addict, and although this statement is true, the purpose of the story, Foster says, is about redemption and not recovery. The story was meant as a study of relations between brothers and was not written as a narrative about how to combat addiction. And the reader must not confuse Sony's addiction with the real issues that concern the narrator, which is the math teacher. If the reader reads the story through the perspective of the narrator and sees it as a narrator story, then the reader can fully understand the story's purpose. And Foster also mentions that the readers today want to identify a problem in a story like addiction and seek a direct solution due to personal influences in pop culture, like daytime talk shows and made-for-television movies. And if one reads a story through a filter of daytime talk shows, the reader will miss the focus of the story and completely misunderstand it. A TV show example that I referenced was Breaking Bad. In the show Breaking Bad, Walter White, a high school chemistry teacher, is diagnosed with terminal cancer. With a new child on the way and living with a son who suffers from cerebral palsy, Walter is afraid about his family's financial stability. Worried that his illness will ruin his family financially, Walter begins making methamphetamine and eventually ends up creating a drug empire. To understand the story, one must put themselves in Walter's shoes and understand him through his perspective. Walter's low salary as a teacher will not suffice, as he is now responsible for his chemotherapy bills and providing for his newborn child and his disabled son. Walter begins manufacturing methamphetamine to collect as much money as he can to pay for his treatment and leave enough money for his family when he is gone. If viewers do not watch the show through Walter's perspective, they will only perceive Walter as a drug producer and not as a man who is trying to provide for his family. And here are some key points from chapter 24. In order to fully understand and appreciate a literary work, It is important to read literature through the narrator's and/or character's point of view. The reader must also acknowledge the time period of when the story was written, meaning one must read through the author's time period and not through their own reality. The reader must understand that there is differences in cultures. What may be normal to a character in a literary work may not be normal to the reader. The reader must read with the setting in mind to understand the literary work, and the setting includes geography, season, location, and time of day.